Well, it is 8 a.m., 8 p.m., excuse me, Eastern. So I guess we will get started here. Excellent. Well, thank you to everyone that's joining us, and welcome to APSA's 8th interactive session of the 2021-2022 academic year. We're super excited to host tonight's event, which is going to feature current students and trainees to really help answer any general questions people may have about the MD, DO, PhD application process. My name is Kevin, and I'll be moderating this evening. I'm a first-year MD, PhD student at Vanderbilt. And in the chat box, we also helping us moderate is Noreen, who's also a first-year MD, PhD student. But more importantly, we have 5 really amazing panelists who really are taking time out of their day to join us. I think Ike might be running a little late, but we'll go ahead and get started regardless. Maybe we'll just go around and have everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll launch into questions that people have submitted. For those people that want to submit questions, the chat box is open. But Jessica, do you want to go first? And then we'll just have popcorn around and have everyone introduce themselves. Maybe name, undergrad, maybe if you're doing your PhD, what's in your training, any fun introductions you want to have.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Tan. I am currently a 7th-year student at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia for my undergrad, and I also got a master's there. Funny fact is I was working on antibodies against influenza virus when the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic started out. So I kind of pivoted over there, and now I'm back in medical school and still watching, as virology is kind of everyone's favorite topic. So feel free to ask me about any virus questions you have. And I'll popcorn to Ernesto.
Thank you so much, Jessica. I'm Ernesto Rojas. I'm a 3rd-year MD PhD at UCSF. I'm originally from LA, born in Honduras though, so I am an immigrant and first gen to go to college, and then went to undergrad at UCLA, and now here I am in the labs of Diana Laird and Tiffany McKenzie studying sacrococcygeal teratomas, a germ cell tumor. And maybe a fun fact about myself is that I've been featured in the New York Times before. Oh, sorry, let me popcorn over to Allie.
All right, my name is Allie. I'm a 9th-year, goodness gracious, MD PhD student at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine in my 3rd year of med school. Just having completed my PhD in genetics of alcohol use disorder and had an F30 funding that pre-doctoral fellowship. I went to UConn for undergrad and for my master's degree. It's hard to think of a fun fact at this point. It's been a long day. I will popcorn to Leanne.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leanne Dumini, and I'm currently an MD PhD student at the University of Florida. I'm back in my 3rd year of medical school after finishing up my PhD in genetics and genomics. My project focused on cardiovascular precision medicine. So I identified predictors for a drug called spironolactone response in heart failure patients. Let's see, I also went to UF for undergrad as well, and I did my master's there as well. And fun fact, I compete and I help run video game tournaments in my spare time. So who's left? Popcorn to Ike?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ike Junior. I am in my last year of medical school in the MD PhD program in the University of Arizona, Tucson. Yeah, I think that I missed the instructions, but I know that a fun fact is part of this. I like to play guitar.
Amazing. Well, thank you, especially all these panelists. Thank you all for being here. I'm sure all of you are extremely busy. So we're extremely grateful that all of you took time out of your day to really give us some wisdoms and pearls on this whole MD PhD application / journey. I know Ike has to leave in about half an hour. So we're really grateful you joined, especially last minute because we had a panelist drop out. So thank you. For all those attendees who maybe step away or miss part of this, as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded. If you have any questions, please submit those through the Q&A box. And we've also already gathered questions that people submitted during the registration process. So we'll start with that. We have a team of co-moderators behind the scenes helping us collect questions. So in addition to using the Q&A feature here on Zoom, you can also contact us through APSA's Twitter and also by emailing Noreen, who she will drop her email into the chat for that. But that's really all the announcements we have. So thank you again for all for being here. And so kind of the first question we'll just start with really broadly, kind of a two-parter here is, how did all of you get into medicine / research? And how did you decide that you wanted to do an MD PhD as opposed to just an MD versus just a PhD? And we're just grab, whoever wants to start first, we'll keep this an open, casual conversation.
Sure, I can start first. So what got me into medicine, same as many people, just having that interest from like being a young child and being exposed to medicine and just carrying that forward to being an undergrad. But what took me by surprise was how much I enjoyed research as an undergrad. So I pursued that pretty early on in my undergrad training. And what I fell in love with more than just medicine was the idea that we could change medical practice and improve medicine for the better for more people. So with ideas like public health and implementation science, and a lot of things that will just improve how we can take care of patients. So that's the part I ended up falling in love with and realized that an MD PhD would most likely be the best way to pursue a career in that.
I can go next. So a little bit about my background is, like I mentioned, I'm an immigrant first gen to go to college. So when I was in high school, I was really interested in science. Thought I wanted to do, medicine, because if you like science, you go into medicine, right? Like, at least that's what most people tend to assume. But then when I was in undergrad, I realized that a lot of my faculty, professors were like, writing textbooks, not just reading them. And that was really exciting to me. And UCLA had a really great program called the biomedical research minor that basically got you into any lab you wanted to go to. And around that same time, I was really interested in how a cell becomes you and I and development. And so my undergrad major was molecular cell and developmental bio. And at the same time, I was also getting my EMT license, and I got to see the birth of my cousin. And that was such an amazing experience. And so I knew I wanted to do medicine and care for people and help them. And then I started to do research on infertility in a lab at UCLA that was looking at using macaque models. And that was super exciting. So people could return their fertility through basically making skin cells into induced pluripotent stem cells and then changing those into your sperm and egg. And I eventually realized that there was a thing called the MSTP program, like a MD PhD. And I was like, well, that sounds like a perfect, mix of both. I was very lucky to have mentors who were very invested in what I wanted to do. So I had a lot of support on figuring out, what I needed to do, took a gap year, and, I had a lot of experience with research, and I really enjoyed it. And then, medicine as well as an EMT.
I was born in the US, but my parents and their generation were all born in China. So for me, I was also interested in science at an early age, and also by kind of default was like, I guess that means I have to be a doctor. And it was only in about middle school that I realized that physicians were not necessarily scientists. And I participated in a program that was geared towards helping students from underrepresented backgrounds gain access to science and medicine. And I started in that program the summer after 7th grade and kind of just kept going along that track. And ultimately, I really felt passionate about, trying to change things for the better, like on a patient by patient case and also on a broader scale. So that's why I wanted to do both science and medicine. I forget if that was the question, but I'll stop talking from now. It's also been a long day for me.
Let's see. I was initially interested in, well, I don't know, I've been interested in medicine for as long as I can remember. And one thing that marks that is the passing of one of my close friends when I was 11, and had this vision after that of becoming a pediatric oncologist that ultimately is not going to go that path. Went the pre-med route in college and joined a lab. And it was after I joined that lab and studied a chronic lung disease called silicosis that I started to reevaluate things in the sense that I knew that whatever work that I did would have like a broader impact if I were to engage with things in the science and research world, as well as having that like person-to-person impact going to medical school, which is why I decided to look into combined degree programs.
Wonderful. And I know there are a lot of questions coming in. I know some of our panelists are busy typing behind the scenes too, so we appreciate that. Another question that did come in, it's been asked a couple of times. For those of you that took any gap time off, so gap years off before starting, do any of you have any recommendations for maybe what people can be doing during their gap years, how to secure some letters of rec? How did you even get your position that you did during your gap year? Any advice there for those applicants, probably this upcoming cycle, who is considering taking some gap time? Did anyone here take gap years off?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did. I took a gap year. And I did research. I think most people end up doing some kind.
And so, oh, sorry, give me 1 second.
There you go. Now we can hear you.
Oh, there we go. So basically, yeah, did research, continued in the lab that I was already working in. I know some people go and do like NIH 2-year postbacks. There's other programs, but most people end up doing some kind of research, and it also gives you an opportunity to see what 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, when like however much time you're working in the lab, to see if that's something that you really like to do, because you have to do a full PhD, which is quite the experience as well.
I took 3 gap years in total. For the first 2, I was in a master's program, and for the third one, I was working full-time doing research as a co-op for GlaxoSmithKline, a pharmaceutical company in the suburbs of, they have some research labs in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And I also was teaching MCAT prep part-time for part of that year as well, in addition to applying for MD PhD programs, which can sometimes feel like a full-time job and is expensive in a lot of ways, not just financially, but also in terms of time and energy, especially when you have to travel for interviews, which may or may not happen in this era of COVID. But someone earlier asked about low income, and I just wanted to chime in on that income is definitely a huge, or lack of financial resources is definitely a huge barrier, because applications are extremely expensive. And if you want to volunteer and gain clinical exposure, research exposure, a lot of those mean that you might not be able to spend the same amount of time working and earning income. So it can certainly be a challenge. But one nice thing is if you get into an MD PhD program, and most DO PhD programs, and actually some MD PhD programs don't do this, but most of them do cover tuition and also health insurance while you're a student.
I think that ties really nice that actually into a question we got earlier, talk about the financial burden of like that much schooling. So as I'm sure a lot of our attendees know, the MD PhD DO training program is a long program, 7, 8, 9 year, 10 years sometimes. So how does that financial part of that play? Whether or not your program is stipended or not, how has the financial aspect of the training impacted you, or has it not? I think several people are curious about that.
I'm happy to try and answer that. Just to make sure I'm understanding the question correctly. So it's, what is the financial impact of such a long training program, more or less? And I mean, there's a few ways to look at it. If you want to be cynical, you can talk. Really, if your goal is to make quick money, you'd be better off slinging stuff in the streets. Like, you'd be better off doing a side hustle that doesn't involve obeying the law. You know, this is not a get quick rich kind of plan. This is a pursuing a very special opportunity to be trained with two different minds, but really one major school of thought to solve problems. So you have the credentialing and the training to see patients and to participate in clinical care. You have the training and the research, the training in research to answer nitty-gritty, first of all, formulate appropriate questions and then investigate questions. So I found that most students that I've come across are more interested in fine-tuning their skills and honing their skills. The stipends, the way the finances break down in terms of what money you take home, it varies slightly depending on where you're at in the country and costs of living and stuff like that. But more or less, programs try to make it so that you don't have to worry about the finances. You have enough to live. And beyond that, if you want to do extra things, you can. But again, the goal of this training is to build your skill set up, build your toolbox, so that when you get to the next step, you'll be incredibly useful. And I think that's usually what people are more concerned about, is whether or not they're getting as much bang for their buck in terms of their research training.
Yeah, maybe just to echo a little bit of some of what Ike has been saying, is, yeah, the goal of this is not, don't do this because it's a free ride to med school, because over the long run, you actually make much more money as an MD in, going into practice faster. But in terms of finances, let me just say that there is gatekeeping with like the cost of applying for med school, applying for like MCAT, like, taking your MCAT, study books. And so all of these things add up, and it's very expensive to go and even apply to MD PhD, or even to apply to any kind of MD program. And then in terms of once you're in, most stipends are pretty comparable. However, where you live matters a lot. So I live in San Francisco. My stipend is technically one of the highest in the countries, but it's not, comparable to other places. So I know places where you can, have a very large apartment with an extra room and on the stipend and, live a pretty comfortable life. Here, I just have to do other things. So I do also tutor for MCAT or coach on MD admissions and stuff. So I do have another source of income. I also do support my family. So I do send money home, and I still have some money to be able to save. So I think, it's a really balancing act. And in terms of like not having to worry, I don't have to worry about loans for like med school, right? I don't have to worry about, having my health insurance. And so there are a lot of privileges for being here, and I get to do things that I really enjoy. And doing research is really, really fun.
Just to echo what everyone's already said on this topic, but every year that you're not actively, employed is a year of lost income, and also a loss of like gaining seniority in whatever you're doing. So even though I personally consider being an MD PhD student part of my career, my income does not reflect that, high level of education or anything like that. And if you become a physician and go through residency training and then even do fellowship training after that, that's like all going to add on to the years that you're not actively working and pulling in salary. Stipends are great, but definitely don't choose this path for the money, because you can definitely find other paths that pay a lot more quickly, assuming that, you don't go for decades of training where you're being paid kind of just enough to make it sort of worth it for most people. I shouldn't say for most people, to allow us to kind of get by, assuming a lot of things.
Excellent. Thank you all for that. Someone who registered for this webinar earlier submitted a question I thought was really interesting. Maybe a couple of you could walk us through what a typical day in the life of a MD, PhD student is like. Maybe not every single minute of your day, but like what a typical day, maybe remind us what phase of training you're in and maybe how that looks like.
So I'll answer this by not answering this only because my training was very different. So I was fortunate to have a mentor that didn't keep track of my hours, which was a pro and con, because pro, I didn't have traditional work hours, but con, I was working 2, 3, 4 in the morning some days just to keep up with my projects. So I would say that in graduate school, your schedule is very much dictated by the style of your mentor. A lot of people that, for example, my colleagues, they're working like 8 to 6 in the lab most days. Some days they'll have to go a bit longer if an experiment runs long, or they have to take care of mice or animals or whatnot. So, but typically 8 to 6 is what their hours were. And they do, typical research things, and also combining that with going to class as well. So that's a skeleton for what grad school is like. On top of that, some MD PhD students will have clinical obligations or clinical research obligations. So for example, I was running a clinical trial basically during the day. So I had to juggle that with grad school. And they also expect at my school for us to do shadowing throughout the graduate school process. So a couple of hours every month, for example. So that's a rough skeleton of what goes on during the grad school portion.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Right now, for our current applicants, a lot of them have interviewed and are waiting back. This is a fun little time. I remember last year being in this very position. So several people are wondering if you guys can remember back to the time when all of you were applying, what that experience waiting for kind of interview invites to come out, but also after interviewing at a school. Did any of you do anything communication-wise? Did people write letters to schools? Did you follow up with schools after interviewing with them? I know for some people it's been a little while, but for those of you who can remember, what was the kind of post-interview process like? And if you can remember, do you have like any recommendations of what students could be doing right now as they're kind of waiting to hear back from a program?
Okay, I think this is still valid even though I applied in 2012. So take anything that I say with a grain of salt. But in the time between like interviewing and then waiting to hear back from programs, I definitely did follow up, especially with programs that I was very interested in. And even with the ones that I interviewed at and maybe did not fully see myself there, I thank them for their time and taking time out of their schedules to talk to me and interview me. And for the ones that I was most interested in, would follow up regularly with any updates that I had. If I was working on a manuscript, or if I think in that time I also presented at my first conference. So I was able to provide updates on my application during that time period.
Is there anyone here that's been on the student side of admissions or interviewed candidates for their respective programs? Wonderful. Maybe for those that have, can you maybe speak to that side? Is there anything that makes an applicant stand out, or any advice you have kind of on the other side of the table for those students that may be interviewing, have any remainder interviews for this application cycle or for upcoming cycles?
One thing I want to say about this is that it's actually really, really hard to stand out, I think, because a lot of applicants are really amazing and you shouldn't feel imposter syndrome, but like it's just the people who are interested in applying for MD PhD and DO PhD programs tend to be kind of like it's scary competition. When I got to my program, I was like, how did I even get in? Because everyone around me seems so amazing and so talented and so much smarter and blah, blah, blah. And I also got off the wait list like super, super last minute. So that didn't help. But what I want to tell you is that a rejection is not a reflection of who you are and what value you have and the potential you have. Because when it comes down to who gets in, it's like, just like, I don't even know what it comes down to. It's not the number of publications. It's not your MCAT score. At least in my experience being on the admissions committee here at my school, it's never down to those things. It's about who talked to you during your interview and what they have to say about you. So I think once you have an interview, what really, really comes across importantly is who you are as a person, how well you communicate that. Don't give any red flags. Like, don't, be nice, be polite to every single person you interact with, and just be you, because you don't want to go to a program where you're not going to be happy and you're not going to be appreciated and valued. So it's really, really hard to set yourself apart in a lot of ways, but just be you and try to find a program that appreciates you for who you are. And don't take rejection as, again, any statement about who you are.
I definitely echo all that Jessica said, including getting off the waitlist at the very last second, and not taking rejection as like a sign of like any aspect of your character whatsoever, because you're already excellent if you've gotten to the point where you're applying to these programs. Yeah, it essentially does come down to the interview. Be yourself and show the programs that you're applying to why they selected you for an interview.
Yeah, definitely want to echo that. So also helping out with some of the admissions process. If you are in the stage where you're getting interviews or you haven't had an interview yet, I would highly recommend practicing with a colleague, maybe the person that you are shadowing with, you've done research with, a postdoc, something like that. Because I notice a lot of, as what was said earlier, the interview is so important. Your experience and the way you're able to carry yourself during the interview is highly weighted. And so if you're able to kind of calm the nerves as much as possible and rehearse, yes, but more like make for good communication and make the words flow in your story of medicine to be told a little bit better. Any little thing you can do to help improve that will help you for the interview.
That's some excellent advice, all of you. Thank you very much. As a reminder to everyone, we're about halfway through. This session is being recorded, so we have a lot of questions coming in. A lot of people sign up for this. We're trying our best to answer as many of these questions and compile them as possible. On that note, we will have another APSA session coming up specifically about choosing a program. So around the spring, when we get closer to releases, we'll have a specific webinar for deciding a program. But maybe very briefly, and a few of you already touched on this, but how did you decide on choosing a program? Were there certain factors you considered? Location, the research, the clinical training? How did you all end up at your programs? And what kind of factors did you weigh on that?
I think the first thing is the research. So you probably want to go somewhere that you have at least 3 faculty. You could imagine yourself being in their lab in terms of like things that you're kind of interested in. And even especially like if you're not exactly sure what you want to do, that like, they have lots of options for you to figure out what you want to do. The second thing for me was location, because if I'm going to spend 8 years of my life, especially my 20s, in a place, then I should probably enjoy it. And San Francisco was definitely going to be that for me. And around that same location is like weather. I've never lived somewhere that was cold. I'm a California boy, so I think I wanted to stay somewhere like pretty nice. And then proximity to family for me was really important as well. Given my family is very important to me, they're all in LA, and so being close to them was really important to me too. And I think, you know, the number one thing that I figured out after coming to the schools and seeing people was, who would my classmates be? What is like the culture of the place? And so for UCSF, it was very community organized, very progressive, forward thinking. So for me, it was like, you know, once I was here, I was like, okay, this is like some really fun people who look like they're having a good time. And, you know, they were all in you know, great mood. And so it was a really great culture around here as well.
Anyone else with how they ended up choosing their program or the factors they considered?
For me, location was extremely important because I wanted to be somewhere where I could go shopping in a Chinese grocery store without too much difficulty. But more seriously, I really wanted to be close to my family. And I wanted to be somewhere where I didn't feel like I stuck out too much. So I interviewed at some schools where when I was walking around in the neighborhood, I was the only person that looked like me. And that wasn't very comfortable for me. I grew up in the Northeast, and I am very happy to have stayed in the Northeast. So geography was actually very, very important to me.
Excellent, thank you. As far as the application process with the dual degree of research and clinical, a lot of people are wondering how you balance research experience with clinical experience in your application. So did all of you feel like you had, or how did you get both research and clinical experience as an applicant? And how kind of did you balance that maybe in your essays, in your interviews? What was that like?
So wait, just to clarify the question, like, what was it like balancing all of the things that you were expected to do for applications as an undergrad?
Yeah, I think that's what the person was asking.
Okay. For me, at least, I tried to treat it with the mentality of like a full-time job. So I know with classes, like you're not in class the whole time. So I was basically, if I wasn't doing research, I was in the clinic shadowing. And if I wasn't in the clinic shadowing, I was volunteering. And that seemed to work out best for me in terms of like time management, at least. It's funny saying that because my time management seems to have gotten worse as time has gone on. But that being said, at least with all of the things that you're trying to juggle, setting aside hours that you are planning to have like each of the components of the application, that was what helped me kind of stay sane during that process. Also helping stay sane is just making sure I had some activities that I enjoyed. So for those of you earlier on in your undergrad, you don't have to do all extracurriculars that are related to medicine. In fact, I know it, as we said earlier, it's difficult to stand out, but it helps to stand out if you're doing some theater or something, or you are, like, for example, I was the vice president of Japanese club and I did a lot of stuff related to that. So definitely try to use that as an outlet, but then you can also use that in your favor as a way to help your application.
What I maybe want to add is just that, you know, the MD PhD I think is different than the MD application in terms of like, we're looking for physician scientists, and that's the emphasis is on the science, at least of many of the schools. There are some schools that don't, but I think most schools are looking for physician scientists. And so really leaning into what your research is, what are you interested in? And then, the medicine side is just that you understand what medicine looks like, that you understand why you would want to practice, and what that kind of area looks like. But you don't have to do like a lot of shadowing. I actually never even shadowed until I was here. I was an EMT, and I wasn't an EMT for long, but that gave me some exposure to just a hospital system, seeing what physicians do, how we talk to patients. But it wasn't a big time for that. And then the other thing I want to say is that you shouldn't be doing things just to check a box, because people can see that when you're just kind of going through the flow and the motions. And it's much more interesting and meaningful when you're doing things that you're like, I'm really excited about this, because then that tells me that you're going to be really excited about something in science, and you're going to stick around and continue to do it, instead of just being, oh, I'm doing this because someone told me to, or because I know that you're supposed to do this. And so I think that comes across as well in terms of like what you bring.
Very good advice there for applicants. Someone asked a few minutes ago, what was something that you were stressed about maybe as an applicant or as a current student, but now looking back at it, realizing as an MD PhD student that you didn't necessarily need to be like stressed about, whether that was application related or just in generally for the future? Was there something that seemed super stressful back then? Now you're looking back, it's like, oh, that was silly. Anything like that?
Maybe I can just blanket statement and just say most things are that. I think it's important to remember to take a breath and really try to like recenter yourself before spiraling down into catastrophizing whatever's happening, and just try to like find ways to figure out like, is this something that is really that stressful? And so for me, it might be like going to the PhD right now is change for having letter grades. Like letter grades is now a thing again. And I'm like, what the hell? I haven't seen that in so long, because we were pass fail in the med school. And I was definitely freaking out for a while. And then I kind of just like had to center myself. I will plug in here as well. Therapy is very important. And to me, I have a very great therapist. We work through these things and figure out like what's going on, and figure out like, is everything still actually going okay? And really that process of being stressed but not letting it take over you and overwhelm you, and having either support systems of family, friends, partners, therapists, mentors, all these people. And I think just in general, most things end up being not the end of the world. But if it is end of the world, of course, then freak out and then get the help that you need. But like most things end up not being that.
That's an excellent point. Thank you. And on the topic of that, sorry, go ahead. Or on the topic of that, kind of what you were talking about, wellness there, can some of you maybe speak to wellness? How do you maintain physical wellness, social wellness, spiritual wellness, emotional wellness, all aspects of that throughout your training, and what that has looked like, especially because it has, I'm sure the training part has been the easiest thing in the world. So how do you balance wellness and all of that?
Before I speak to wellness, I actually did want to add on to the previous topic, but I also just blanked on what that previous topic was. Can someone remind me?
Thing that you were very stressed about that you shouldn't have been, or didn't need to be.
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, I took 3 gap years. And the reason I took 3 gap years is that I just couldn't make myself hit the submit button. I had every part of my application basically ready to go as a junior in college, and I just could not make myself submit the application. I was really dealing with a lot of imposter syndrome. I was like, do I have enough clinical experience? Do I have enough research experience? Do I have good enough letters? Blah, blah, blah. Like, is my application going to be looked upon as a competitive one? I was very stressed out, and I ended up not submitting. And then even the subsequent years, I still had issues, and I meant to submit at the, like, in order to only take 2 gap years, but I, again, couldn't get over that barrier and submit my application. So I even had to take the MCAT a second time because I was just holding back so much. So my advice to you about, just try to push yourself forward. Sometimes it's really scary, especially if you're not sure if you are competitive, but try to get a third party person to chime in on this, and don't just rely on your own your own estimation, because that can be really, really skewed. About wellness, trying to know what you need and what you value and what you prioritize is really important. I've learned a lot about myself through my training so far, and a lot of it is like, what do I absolutely need to say no to? And what do I really, really need to protect with everything I've got? And like, when is an experiment really, really that crucial? When is that hour of studying really going to make a difference? And when is it not going to make a difference? And also finding the people to talk to. I unfortunately haven't found a good therapist that will meet me when I need to be met because of my crazy schedule. But finding the people who you can talk to and be honest to. And for me, I've even taken up writing in a diary, because I can't talk to someone sometimes, and I just write. And I never read it again, but it's there and it allows me to vent. But identifying what you need and making sure you get that is really, really important.
Those are all very helpful advice there. Thank you. Especially with COVID and the pandemic now, we kind of talked about this earlier about clinical advice, and I know none of you applied during when COVID started, but looking back, is there any advice you would have for our current applicants about gaining clinical experience, especially with COVID? Maybe looking back at your own programs, are there any ways you think, or like first years in your programs you've talked to, is there any way to get that clinical experience if you just can't be in the hospital shadowing because of COVID requirements? Would you recommend applying this year, or do you think applicants are better waiting off if they're struggling to have that clinical experience because of the pandemic?
I think many programs are understanding that you can't get clinical experience right now. So I don't think that's a reason to not apply. So why do we care about clinical experiences? Why do we care about you seeing patient interactions? It's, what are the skills that you're watching? You're watching, how do I interact with people who are really vulnerable? How do I empathize? How do people like have these connections? So are there other ways that you could make that, with other like extracurriculars or things that you care about? So for example, if you're like an RA, are there experiences when you have conflict, or, if you're working, at a job, like, are there experiences with conflict resolution, with how you interact and empathize with people that you can emphasize as, it's not clinical, but like it has the same skills. As a physician, we just know about your body, but the rest of it is, how do we be human to someone who's like worried or anxious or, has a question, and how do we communicate effectively in a way that they'll understand? And so all of these are skills that you can get anywhere else. And so, finding ways to think about and telling a story about how the things that you do could interact into a patient interaction is a way to think about, in COVID, how we write about these things. And that's what I've had my students do as they apply to med schools now.
Very good, thank you. When you guys were applying, when you all were applying, did any of you already have specialties in mind clinically? Did any of you already have research, like you all knew what your PhD was going to be in? Has it changed? Does it matter for an applicant that they have to be dead set on a PhD training course or a clinical course, or is it really flexible? And have you found your clinical and research interests change along your training pathway?
Okay, so I said this before, I wanted for the longest time to be a pediatric oncologist, wanted to do cancer research, didn't end up doing cancer research in college because I could not find any labs that were taking students, but nonetheless wanted to go in to med school, with that end goal in mind. And I was told at the very beginning, and I thought that this was really good advice, so I keep like passing it on, to go in with an open mind, both toward the MD side as well as the PhD side. And I found that that actually led me to the place where I feel most comfortable, both in research and in and in the clinic, like as I've gone through my third year rotations.
I don't think you need to have your ideas in mind in terms of what you have to do. And people change all the time, but I think it is helpful to have a story, right? Like we all kind of told the story about how we're interested in medicine and science. And for a lot of people, that ends up being like, okay, I did, for me, research in infertility, saw the birth of my cousin, I want to have a family. And I want people who want to have a family, a biological family, to be able to do that. And as an MD PhD, I can go into the lab and study, early development. How do we get people to be able to have kids if they want to, and infertility, and then also go to the clinic and deal and help with people who are struggling with fertility. And, do I want to do IVF work? Yeah, that's what I think I do. But when I go back to med school, I might not like it. And so, I think like Ali is saying, like having that open mind is like the best way to go about it. But you still want to have a story, and, you don't have to, you just want to put your nickel down for now, and, you can move it around later on.
Agreed, 100%. But what I would say as well, just make sure you have the story intact. So some people have like a pediatric story. They love kids and they volunteered in a pediatric clinic and all that stuff. That will help you craft your application and then help you communicate that during the interview. But don't feel like it's a contract and don't feel like you'll be tied down to it in the future. So don't worry necessarily about that. Just do, again, what you're passionate about at the moment.
I don't know if others would agree with this, but you can also kind of be kind of like, I don't know what I want to do exactly, but I feel really strongly that this training is going to be important to doing what I eventually want to do. You might want to be a little more like, you need a story for sure, and you need it to be true to you, because whether or not it's genuine is going to make a difference in how it comes across and how much you can convey about it and also yourself. But you can kind of leave it open-ended. Like I read applications sometimes where people are like, oh, I know absolutely I'm going to be a neurosurgeon fixing this one specific syndrome in children. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, what if you really, really hate that life? Does that mean you're going to completely abandon medicine and science because you're no longer going to be doing that one tiny thing? So being too narrowly focused can actually make someone like me doubt whether or not you're going to continue on the path if that one thing falls through. Because a lot of expectations are not actually going to be met with reality. So I think sometimes it's better to be to show that you're open-minded and still developing, because you are, and we really can't know what we want to do 5 years from now, 10 years from now, whatever years from now. The world is going to change, medicine is going to change, science is going to change. I'm sure there's a lot more people interested in viruses now, right? For example, but in another, hopefully 5-10 years, that might shift again. And the fields of medicine and the fields of science are also going to change a lot. So don't pin yourself to anything, and don't let anyone else do that to you either, at whatever stage of training you're going to be in.
I really like that advice. Thank you. Someone asked earlier, as far as the application process goes and like kind of more qualitative parts, so I think like the essays, what this person's asking, how vulnerable can you be on that? So for example, if you're part of a community that in the past has been marginalized by the healthcare, should you bring that up as part of the story of why you want to pursue a physician scientist degree? Or will certain people who read those essays and applications find those stories inherently political or controversial? Is it better to steer away from that? Or kind of how vulnerable can you be? And maybe we can tie this into another question we got, talk about mental health. Is it okay to talk about mental health struggles in your application process? Or would you advise kind of turning away from those topics?
Yeah, I mean, I would be as comfortable as you are, like, as comfortable as you are sharing this with people. Like, if you're comfortable sharing that and you think that's important, like, to share, and Yeah, absolutely. And one of the questions in here that I was about to type up is about tattoos and piercings. And I think all of these things that are you, mental health struggles, identities, tattoos and piercings, if those things are important to you and you want to share that and you want to show yourself there, right? You're going to be there for a decade. And like, if you're not wanted there because of these things that you carry that are important to who you are, then like, I just don't want to be there. I think it's also fair to say, hey, like this is something that isn't, the biggest deal. It's not a deal breaker. And that's fair. But just personally, I would love to, share myself and be like, do you like me as I am? Because it's also, do I like them, right? So it's a two-way street. It's, does the school, will they support me and will I feel supported there? And then do I want to be there? Do they have the things that I want to do? So, you want both matches. I think it's like getting married or like, finding a partner or something. So I think it's important to, share whatever you're comfortable with and however you're comfortable with sharing it. And it doesn't always have to be in the primary essay. It can be in the secondary. It can be at interviews. But at some point, you might want to share all bits of you to see like, hey, like, is that cool? Like, because this is important to me. I think that's kind of the way to think about it.
I completely agree with what Ernesto just said, but at the same time, am also extremely like protect yourself as well. And if it's a vulnerability, people can see it that way and can use it against you. So the idealistic part of me is like, yes, be yourself, just only, just be completely you. And if people don't appreciate you, you don't want them anyway. But a more pragmatic part of me is like, you need to get a foot in the door at some point. And if that means toning it down a bit, maybe you need to tone it down a bit. And then when you get farther along, you can be more and more and more you. And I hate saying that, but we live in a world where the systems are the way they are, and they're designed to keep certain people out. So if you are too blatantly not the type of person that they cookie cuttered designed everything for, it might not be the time to show that when you're applying into a dual degree program. I hate to say that, but
No, that's fair.
be careful.
It's a balance for sure. Like we said earlier, you want to show enough of yourself that you are essentially matchmaking to the program. You want them to know who you are, and then vice versa. But then also you want to get your foot in the door. That's some advice that faculty has always given me in terms of pursuing things. Like, you want to finish your training and then you can literally do whatever you want. You can be the biggest advocate for whatever purpose you have or whatever your passion is. And so it's that balance of trying to go as far as you can so that you can become the person that you want to be, and then also advocate for others in whatever space you would like to.
Thank you all for that. Definitely not an easy questions, and very nice to hear different perspectives on this. Thank you. I want to be as respectful of everyone's time as possible. So as we kind of close up here in the last few minutes, maybe we can go around one more time, just once around the panel, maybe looking back, just any last piece of advice you have. I know we have people here, some people here are currently waiting back for, or have already applied and are waiting to hear. And we have some people here who are maybe in their first or second year of undergrad, so are so many years away. So really any piece of advice you can have for applicants. We'll kind of just end on that note. If anyone wants to start, we can go around and then we'll just end with that.
Before I even forget what the prompt is, can I start? My most important takeaway before I forget is literally to know yourself very well and be yourself, but also be aware of how yourself will be perceived by others. That's very convoluted, but as long as you can truly be who you are, even if you have to tone it down a little or hide it a little temporarily, I think, you need to be yourself in order to be happy. And you need to be in a place where you can do that. And need to be with people who will accept you for who you are. So try to know who you are, because I think that's where it all kind of starts. And then try to find, the right place for you to go through this training, because it's very hard, very difficult, very costly in so many ways. And then make sure you take care of yourself.
For me, I would leave people with try to determine and then remember what your why is. That helps you with so many things throughout this training. One, it's long, so trying to motivate you throughout the process also helps with mental health, because then you can start to prioritize things a bit better. You don't have to say yes to everything. And then you can also like think through the purpose of why you're doing specific things. If there's just this one rotation you really don't want to do, you remember your why, and it just keeps you going throughout the hard times. So I definitely recommend figuring out what that is, especially early on, because that'll help you develop the application, but then sticking by it, and you can always reevaluate it, but at least having that in the back of your mind while you're doing this.
Let's see, if I were to give myself advice as me applying to programs 10 years ago, I would shake myself and say apply early. I applied during my cycle in September and was lucky to get interviews, let alone an acceptance. So apply on the earlier side rather than the later side. And then not only during the application process or even in the pre-application process, but also throughout life, surround yourself with people who will support you. And like therapy, as has been echoed a couple of times, has been an excellent resource for me personally. And like enjoy the process of continuing to learn who you are and what you're eventually going to become.
Yeah, and I think I guess the last thing I'll add is as advice is like take a look at yourself, and applying is such a proud thing that you have accomplished, and whether or not you got in, whether you got into one place, multiple places, but even getting to the point where like you're applying is a win to like celebrate. So congratulations. And I just want to say that the panelists were super awesome. It's been a pleasure being on here with you guys.
And on that note, thank you all very, very much. And thank you for everyone who joined us for a Q&A session today with all of these wonderful current trainees. So I want to one last time thank all our panelists again for their time, as well as everyone who came to this, who made this a really interactive session. I also would really like to thank all those people over at APSA, including our Diversity Ad Hoc Committee, our Public Relations Committee, and our Partnerships Committee. And also a huge thanks to those at McKenna Management, including both Gabby and Stephen, who we bought a bunch of times to help us set up all of this. So thank you all. And finally, of course, thank you to all of our APSA leadership. We're currently in the process of putting together even more application helpful interactive sessions. As I mentioned, we have an upcoming session that we're currently putting together to help those who will soon be deciding on a program. And we know we're getting close to that time of the year, which is always exciting for those who are applying. For more information, continue to stay tuned to our social medias, including our Twitter, and continue to look out for emails. But otherwise, thank you all again for being here, and have a wonderful night.